talked to Brian Eno and Gary Hustwit about their documentary Eno, and to Benjamin Ree about the remarkable life of Ibelin. I'm Thom Powers, and this is Pure Nonfiction. Last month, we held our first London edition of Documentary Spotlight, our ongoing series of live events in partnership with the Ankler. We spoke to 6 film teams in London, and we'll share those conversations over the next 2 episodes. We start with the film Eno, about the musician Brian Eno, who collaborated with the likes of Roxy Music and David Bowie in the 1970s, was a pioneer of ambient music, and is constantly experimenting to this day. The filmmaker is Gary Hustwit, who had a prior career managing indie bands. He transitioned into documentary with his acclaimed trilogy about design, Helvetica, Objectified, and Urbanized. To make Eno, Gary took inspiration from Brian's experiments with creating auto-generative music. To explain that crudely, Brian will program a sequence of notes into a computer, then tell the computer how to manipulate those notes and experience the unexpected directions that takes the music. Brian draws a comparison to a flower garden, where seeds are programmed in one way, but are affected by the manipulations of nature that produce an endless variety of flowers. Gary took a similar approach to the film. He started with 30 hours of interviews and 500 hours of Brian's personal archive footage. Then Gary and his collaborator Brendan Dawes created a computer program that would reshuffle that material each time the film is played to make the first auto-generative film. Eno premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in January, and since then has held over 500 screenings in theaters, each one of them unique. Let's go to my conversation with Brian and Gary from November 22nd in London. Brian, there are times in this film where you're looking back at old notebooks or tapes, and you seem a little rueful about the experience of diving into this 50-year career. I wonder, what it was that enticed you to say yes to this project, and what the experience was like going back through your career.
I had a number of approaches about making a documentary, a sort of biographical documentary, and I just didn't like the idea of there just being one story, because my own experience of thinking about my past and the way things have evolved is that it changes every time I think about it. There's never one story about your life. Different things become important at different times, and suddenly you realize that something that you overlooked in the past that you didn't think was very important was actually a very significant moment, and other things that occupied a lot of time and attention didn't come to much. So I always think particularly when I look at biographies of artists, that they so much reflect the interest of the person who's telling the story rather than the person who the story is about. So when Gary came up with this suggestion that we make something that was rather like the way I make music, I thought, okay, that makes a lot more sense to me, to say there isn't one narrative. There's never a single narrative about anybody's life. Every time you think about it, you will think about it differently. So I thought it was nice to have something that made that as its opening statement. There's not a definitive story. So it was attractive to me.
And Gary, what was your entryway and interest in making a film about Brian?
Well, I've been a fan of Brian's music for many decades, and I somehow convinced him to do the music for a film that I made about a German designer named Dieter Rams, which was back in 2017 when we were making it. And I think at that time I was kind of suggesting, well, why isn't there a epic career-spanning documentary about you, Brian? To which I got the reply that he just gave about not wanting to be in a conventional biodoc. You mentioned that my background is in music before I got involved in film. And I always like that idea that even if a band is playing the same set list in the London show and in the New York show, it's different. It's different every time. They can make it different. And I just wanted some way for film to be more like music, more performative. And the idea that we spend so much time and money and work, and we make these things, whether it's documentaries or narrative films, and then they're just kind of done. They're just like this digital brick that cannot do anything else. It can't have any other capabilities to be like regionalized or personalized or just evolve. It seemed like something that, now that we have a lot of technology, it's something that we could be interesting to explore, and that was the premise. And Brendan, who you mentioned, the digital artist that I was working with, when we first started playing around with the software, very quickly we realized that Brian would be the perfect kind of candidate for the first generative feature film. So here we are.
And as you created 500 DCPs this year, did you think maybe there's a point to just doing one?
It would have been so much easier to do it as a normal film and cheaper and whatever. But yeah, no, that's what I think is the fun part, is doing things that haven't been done before, and you're going to hit resistance at all kinds of levels, passive and active resistance. But yeah, very quickly learned that we needed to be able to make DCPs in house, so we churned those out pretty quickly now.
The other thing, actually, I should say, is the other attractive thing about this was the idea that the film could carry on growing. So, of course, it isn't limited. It doesn't have to be what it has been so far. New stuff can be. In fact, I think you've added new stuff in, haven't you?
Oh yeah, gosh, since Sundance, when we premiered it, we've added hours and hours of new material to it. So you don't have to. The idea of like a cutting room floor doesn't really exist with this approach, because if it's something that you like and you couldn't find a place for it, you can still have it in the mix. And it might come up tonight, it might come up Sunday when we show it at the V&A. Or it might take weeks for it to come up, but it's still in there somehow. And yeah, we talked about there's new things Brian is doing now, and I'm like, oh, we could just film that and put that in there too. We can kind of keep going. At some point, we'll probably have to stop, but for now,
I might die.
That's true. But for now, it's been exciting to experiment with what can happen if you do give a film that agency, that it can continue to grow and change and evolve, and everyone's going to see a slightly different experience, but it's still going to be this story about Brian, whatever version they get.
So Brian, let me unpack the auto-generative idea a little bit, because I think in the last few years our minds are all on alert for AI and programs like ChatGPT, which we often think of as computer techniques that can deaden art rather than enliven art. And so for people who hear about a computer auto-generating art, if their mind goes to that place, can you describe how you see it?
So the most important question for me at the moment about AI is who owns it. And if it's owned by a bunch of Silicon Valley tech bros who are going to become Trump supporters.
Which it is.
Which it happens to be, yes. Funny that. Yeah. Then I think you will have a disastrous and catastrophic result. In fact, we've already seen those disastrous and catastrophic results. So at the moment, those so outweigh the aesthetic possibilities that I think you have to mention them. We can't talk about AI and pretend it sort of exists as some kind of neutral medium. It isn't. It's owned by people with specific interests in making money and taking power. So that's the foreword to anything you say about AI. After that, the next thing to say is that AI is still a kind of most probable next word machine. That's essentially how it works. It's always a historical experience at the moment. It's dredging an infinity of unnamed sources,
which in a way feels like the opposite of art, which has always been surprising you with an expert.
Yeah. So it's not the opposite in a way, because that is something that, of course, we do in art all the time as well. The history of folk music is the history of people listening to everything that's going on and then coming up with either a failed attempt at imitating it, which often is innovation in itself, or simply a new collage, making a new collage of the existing culture. So it's not the non-innovativeness of it that I would argue against. It's the fact that there's such a strong, super magnetic attraction to the mediocre. And if you want to see this in real life, try getting ChatGPT to write a poem for you. What you spend all your time doing is trying to prevent it being sucked into the chasms of Hallmark. It is just so, the playing field is so much tilted towards the tedious and the commonplace and the sentimental, and you have to sort of say, please don't rhyme moon with June. So the whole process of designing for AI is a huge amount of filtering on the input side, what you tell it to do, and then a huge amount of filtering of what comes out. All that said, that doesn't mean it's uninteresting. I think you can use it to force you into a new sort of set of aesthetic envelopes where you suddenly find yourself dealing with something that you really hadn't predicted or expected.
Yeah, and I think it's an important distinction to, AI is one thing, but generative software and generative art has been had a long, long history, pre-digital history. And the platform that we created, I mean, it was 5 years in the making, and it's a human-coded generative software. We put our intelligence as filmmakers and storytellers into the algorithms. It wasn't trained on watching 1,000 other people's documentaries and then do something like that. So there are ways to use generative technology of your own making on your own material, which is the data set for Eno is just all Brian's archive and our new footage. But use it in interesting ways. Using the technology, like generative technology, is more of a structural or narrative tool rather than a footage generation tool.
Brian, in one of the themes that was prominent, at least in the version I saw of the film, was you describing your evolution to kind of understanding the role of feeling in music. And I wonder if you can elaborate, what that journey was for you and what that recognition meant for you.
Yeah. So feeling is a dirty word in science. Even cognitive scientists don't deal with it very much. It's sort of, feelings are unquantifiable and difficult to compare with each other and so on and so on. So they somewhat get left out of the story. There's a neuropsychologist called Mark Solms who's written a very interesting book called The Hidden Spring, which is about the source of consciousness. And it's the first thing I've ever read where feelings take a very important role. So his thesis is that feelings are the first thing that we have. They're the first line of response. Feelings then translate into thoughts. So it's that way round. It's feelings first, thoughts second, actions third. And that sequence, I think we ought to remember, because there's a whole notion among both critics and other people who write about art that thought should be the first aspect. And that if there isn't a formed thought, there cannot be an effective piece of work. You see this very much in art education now, where students are expected to produce a sort of description of what they're doing and why they're doing it, and then carry it out, as though the recipe precedes the experience. This, I think, is exactly what art isn't for. It seems to me that art is a way of indulging your feelings to see where they take you. We have the unique capacity, as far as we know, of all creatures, to be able to model different futures in our mind and to have feelings about them before they exist. So I can read 1984, for example, Orwell's book, and I can have feelings about what a totalitarian society might be like without having to experience living in one. and I can know that I wouldn't want to live
That's
there.
kind of rubbing it in for us Americans.
Sorry, it's quite hard not to rub it in at the moment. We're having our own noses rubbed in it for the next 4 years. So I think it really is trying to say science and art are complementary, both essential, but they don't do the same thing. Science discovers, describes, measures, weighs up, compares, makes predictions. Art digests. I think art is a way of saying, what would this world be like? This world, this whatever the aesthetic world is, that world, what would that be like? And what does that mean for how I want to live and what kind of world I want to live in? So for me, art is digestive, and it's not predictive. It's about modeling all. It's not about this reality. It's about all the other ones that could possibly exist. So controversial view among some artists who don't like to be told that they're dealing in the world of feelings, because feelings don't have any respectability. Feelings are supposed to be sort of feminine and kind of slightly mysterious and, unknowable.
So as I wrap this up, I want to ask you, in the film we see you reflecting about the role of an artist against everything that's going on in the world, including very prominent to you, the damage to the planet that's being created. I wonder, in your reflections on the role of an artist, where you are today with that.
Well, as I said to you earlier, if I'd spent less time reflecting, I probably would have made a lot more art.
Maybe they go hand in hand.
It's taken up quite a lot of my time. What I'm now concerned with is what role does art have in social change? I can see at a kind of background level how it has a huge role. For instance, one of the things that art does is it dignifies certain subjects or areas of experience that may not have been dignified before. To take a very corny example, Uncle Tom's Cabin was a revolutionary book when it was written, because it looked at the life of a black slave and said that person has the same feelings as we do. That was a revolutionary statement then. That is not a different species, that's not an unimportant person. That person has the same sense of dignity and pain and whatever that we have. So I think at a background level, art works hugely in conditioning what we think about and how we think about it. At a foreground level, it's more difficult. I don't want to be a propagandist. I don't want to have signs that kind of emotionally bludgeon people into thinking the same way that I do. So I'm still working on that part. What do we do now? I don't know. Any suggestions? Welcome.
Now we turn to another film that uses new technology for its storytelling. The Remarkable Life of Ibelin profiles a Norwegian video gamer named Mats Steen. He was born with a muscular degenerative disease that required him to use a wheelchair and gave him limited use of his hands. He found his community online in the video game World of Warcraft, where he was known as the muscular character Ibelin. Mats died in 2014 at the age of 25, but he left behind his computer password for his parents. It was only then, after his death, that they discovered all the other lives he had touched as the character Ibelin. The filmmaker Benjamin Ree is also from Norway. He previously made The Painter and the Thief, that was shortlisted for the Oscars in 2020. In order to bring Ibelin to life, Benjamin partnered with an animator to recreate scenes from World of Warcraft that make up a good portion of the film. Here's our conversation in London.
So Benjamin, you started this project with some key assets. You had blogs that Matt's had written that we hear from, and you had found people who knew him in this online community. But you had this formidable challenge of how to illustrate the world of Warcraft where he lived in. Can you talk about how you met that challenge?
I had never played World of Warcraft before. I hadn't made a like animated film before either. So what we did was
So you're the perfect person for this.
we began doing research on YouTube actually, because it's a huge fan community out there. And I found an animation studio in Stockholm. Pivotal was the animation studio. And I met the boss of that animation studio, Rasmus. I was so impressed by the work that studio did. It was very truthful to the game, but also it had like a great sensitivity of how the animation was done. I met Rasmus, the boss of that company. The first thing he told me was that it's only him working in that company, one person. And then the second thing he told me that he on daytime he's studying and working at the storage. It's in the evenings he's doing these animations. And then I asked him, "Can we go to your office?" And he said, "Yes, I live together with my parents." So we went to his place.
Who knew that YouTube could be so deceptive?
Yes, yes. So Rasmus, he has done all the animation, 3D animation in the film. Together with 2 other YouTubers. They knew that world very well. So I knew cinema, he knew gaming. He had spent at least 20,000 hours in World of Warcraft. So we kind of met those 2 worlds and we made that film together. And because of the film, he has now earned enough money to move away from his parents' place, which is also great. So and we all,
someone is making money off documentaries.
And when we started out, World of Warcraft is owned by Blizzard, which is again owned by Microsoft. So it's a huge gaming company, and we didn't have the rights to make this film. So we just made the film without asking for permission.
So let's just pause on this for a second. You spent how many months working on this?
We spent in total 4 years of making the film, but we spent like 3 years before we contacted them, the company.
So you spent 3 years of work and then you had to go ask permission.
Yes. And then we wrote them an email.
School.
I don't know if my producer Ingvild told the investors. I don't know about that, but after 3 years we wrote them an email saying, "Hello, we're a small Norwegian production company. We have made this film where we have kind of stolen your IP and world. Can we use that world for free without any involvement from you?" It's a very kind of typical Norwegian email to send. And we were very happy that we got an answer, because you don't know with these kind of big companies. So we got an answer back where they said that they wanted to watch the film. So then Ingvild and I, we traveled to California. And have you been to Activision Blizzard? It's huge gates opening up and these huge orcs. So it was very intimidating going in there. And I was extremely nervous. I had to take some extra doses of asthma medicine in order to breathe. This asthma medicine called Ventolin. And my producer Ingvild, she's always very positive and positive.
You should get brand sponsorship for that asthma.
Yeah, I should have. They should use have a tutti frutti taste or some nice, really nice flavor there. So we went in.
Your producer's totally upbeat.
So we showed them the film, and I actually did not dare to look up at the screen because we did not have a plan B. I was just looking down on the ground, and then when the end credits was rolling, I dared to look a little bit up, and I saw one of the bosses turn around. He was crying. He said, "This film is fantastic. You will get the rights." So it worked out, and we were very happy about that.
Can you talk about what drew you into this story personally? So, if for people who saw The Painter and The Thief, it's a very different tone of a film about addiction and dysfunctional relationships. This is very different. What was motivating you to make this film?
I knew Mats Ibelin's uncle. He was my teacher at school. He was also the person who taught me filmmaking. And he also played in around like 15 of my amateur films when I was about 11. So like all these amateur films where we were like doing these Tarantino films with using all the ketchup in the kitchen as blood. So he played in all of those films. So I stayed in contact with him over the years. And every year of the anniversary of Mats' passing, he wrote about him on Facebook. But in 2019, he published an article there written by Vicky Schabert from the Norwegian Broadcasting System. I read that article and I cried for many hours afterwards. I thought it was an incredible story. I did not think...
and the article, to be clear, was about this experience the parents had had.
Yes.
But maybe you can just elaborate on that.
So Mats' parents, their biggest sorrow in life was that their son, he passed away when he was 25, was that he did not experience friendships, did not experience love or making an impact. He was just sitting in his room, gaming all the time. The last 10 years of his life, he could kind of almost only move his fingers. So that was their greatest sorrow. They thought that he was a very isolated person. After his passing, they kind of wrote about his passing, and then suddenly they received around 50 emails from all over Europe telling totally different stories about their son. And not only that he was their best friend, but that he had helped them fundamentally. And then people from all over Europe came to his funeral. So that was the basis of the story. I reached out to the uncle just to tell him how much that story meant to me. And then he told me that his brother had filmed Mats' whole life from the day he was born. He was also Mats' first assistant, so he said that they all communicated in text form. And they had these thousands of pages of archived, lived life inside the World of Warcraft. That was when I thought maybe it's possible to make a documentary film here.
And can you explain, if you know better, why there was this gap between the parents' understanding? Like, Mats had this way of expressing himself, this community. Do you know why he was never able to express to his parents that he did have this other life?
To kind of quote Mats' father, he says that he kind of spent 5 minutes condemning the screen and really wanting Mats to go out. And
The father had, like I do to my son.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then after condemning that gaming screen for 5 minutes, he went and watched the real screen, which is television. That is what he's saying about it. And I can understand him because I've also watched kind of friends playing World of Warcraft over the shoulder, and it can feel very excluding. It's a lot of strangely looking characters, a lot of text and symbols. All the male characters have these big arms. If you play a male character, you can also play kind of a cat, or and it's very difficult to feel included into that world if you don't play it. And that was also when I contacted the family. I told them that I really want to make a film here where we will include everyone into that world. We will use the aesthetics from the game, because it's possible to download everything without the company that owns it knowing it. You can download all the characters and then import that into 3D programs.
But to go back to, so the father had condemned it, and that kind of closed a door in Mats being able to let his parents in the value that he was getting out of it. You think there was like a cut of communication?
Yes, you can look at it that way. Also, if you read Mats' blog, he also, writes about he has. Or he had 10 to 11 assistants working with him all the time. So he did not have any privacy. And you can say that he also needed a place where he did not have people around him, that could be only his place. So if you look at it from his point of view, that's also very understandable. And he was at times a bit a secretive person. He was part of an informational documentary that nobody knew about, not his friends or his family, that we found out during the research period. So that was the kind of very beginning of the project. And I think that, when I approached the parents, they said that they really wanted to think about it if they wanted to be part of this, because for them it was like opening up a wound. It could be too emotional, difficult for them to be part of this and make this film. The first thing they told me that anyway they wanted those VHS tapes digitalized. So I did that, and I said I will do it anyway, and you can get that. And what happened then was quite shocking for me personally, because the first footage I saw was of Mats. He was 8 months old. And right beside Mats, in the same playpen, was another baby that I felt looked a little bit like me as a baby. We can remember yourself as a baby. And then I saw my parents being there, and then I understood it's actually me, which is quite extraordinary. And I have the picture. I wish I could have showed it to you here. I can show it to you afterwards on my mobile phone. But it's Mats and me together in a playpen. He was 7 days older than me. So my parents and his parents were friends back in the late 80s, but lost contact when my parents moved away from Oslo when I was 1 year old. And also my colleague at work filmed his funeral because they wanted Mats's friends that could not come to the funeral to be able to watch it. So you had like all these factors with me knowing the uncle, having met Mats without knowing it. So that was the very beginning. And I think that the reason why Mats's family said yes to be part of this was that they wanted to know more about what life their son had lived. And I really wanted that my grandmother would feel included into this world, so she was part of the test audience for this film. And
Did she play World of Warcraft?
A lot, no. She's 94. She has never played a video game or a game ever. And that was the goal, to invite everyone in. And the way we're doing that, they had like 42,000 pages of gaming dialogue. And it really looks like a movie script, which is very fascinating because in the game, you can only do certain emotions. It's just one way of laughing. It's like something like this. So they would write out specific actions and emotional reactions. So Mats would, for example, write, "Ibelin seems sincere yet saddened." That we can animate, but that was written out. So we had a lot of instructions of how to make it. Actually, it was like, originally it was 42,000 pages long movie script. And I can see if I can kind of find one
Take
example.
that, Brian Eno.
I can see if I can find kind of an example here on my phone here. So it's like, here I'm like uploading. This is kind of one scene from the potential scene. Here you see Ibelin picks up a small flat rock and throws it into the ocean. He watches as it skips on the water surface, and then a person says, "Heya," and Ibelin turns his head and blinks as he spots that person. So, and it's, we have the place, we have the date it happened. So what we could do then was that created my own avatar. I did research inside World of Warcraft. So they would point out that was the place it happened. And then these YouTubers, this is their first job, they would do an animatic of that scene. We would take that scene and we would send that to Mats's friends that did experience this. And they would give us feedback, like, my character wouldn't laugh that much. You should tone it down. My character should have a little bit more brownish color. And then we would do like 10 to 15 different drafts, so we got it right. It doesn't look like the exact way you're gaming it, but we are creating a visual representation of also what they're writing out. Because when they are role-playing and writing stuff out, they are visualizing that happening.
So with a minute left, I just want to ask you, what did it mean then for the parents to see this film come out? It came out worldwide, I think a little over a month ago, or around a month ago on Netflix. What has that experience been like for the family?
It's been a very emotional experience for them. Before the Sundance premiere, they had watched the film around 50 times. We had the theatrical release in Norway, where 120,000 people watched it in the theater, which is a lot, yeah. It's a lot compared to how many people live in Norway. And they would travel with the film. I asked Robert Mads's father recently, how many times have you watched it? And he said, watched it 157 times. So they used the film as a part of their healing process. And when they watch the film, they go through all of those emotions. And you can just imagine living with, having a son that has this awful disease called Duchenne, and then thinking that, he will die young and he's just isolated. And then after his passing, rediscovering who he was. And in the film we meet also some of the people Mads had helped. And in the film we also meet Mikkel and Xenia. It's a mother and a child, and Mikkel, he's on the autistic spectrum, and he hadn't been outside for 4 years. He had locked himself inside. Mads helped him back to society again, and they had never met Mads. And they did not know that he was ill, and he could only communicate through his fingers with specialized equipment. So we have like 50 stories like that, how Mads fundamentally changed the lives of so many people around Europe. So in a way, you can say that this film is also a film about the value of a life and how Mads was able to do that.
Benjamin Ree, thank you very much. You can watch the film on Netflix.
That was Benjamin Ree, the director of The Remarkable Life of Ibelin. Earlier, we heard from Brian Eno and Gary Hustwit discussing the film Eno. On our next episode, we'll bring you 4 more conversations from our documentary spotlight in London. If you'd like to follow what we're doing, please subscribe to our newsletter, Doc Voices, written by Bella Racklin. You'll find it on Substack. If you want to advertise to our 40,000 readers, send an email to listen@purenonfiction.net. Thanks to our team, series producer Hannah Norden-Swan and web designer Cross Strategy. Our theme music is composed by Andre Williams, and our executive producer is Raphael Nehausen. I'm Thom Powers. Follow us on Instagram and visit our website at purenonfiction.net.